and I'll get people in. Live stream is set, just getting everyone in from the waiting room.
Thanks, Julia. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for showing up and participating today on this very steamy day in Kansas. It is just, I feel like such a Midwestern. It'd be great if it wasn't for the humidity outside. Oh, gosh. It is. And Derek's put in the chat, football season is just around the bend, and past 4th of July. So as far as I am concerned, it is now soup season. So I don't make the rules. I just live by them. And I am super pumped up about football and soup. So very, very excited. Derek, I make soup at least once a week. So
there's never not a soup season. Chicken and noodles, chili, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So this is just my excuse because it's now past the 4th. It is now past the 4th. So I can really go in with my family. Okay. So we are going to get started. But first, I would like to take a moment and recognize Riva, who's on today. And just have a little moment if anybody wants to share and how much Riva has meant to the early childhood system in Kansas. And as she is transitioning into a new chapter in her life, that I know, Riva, I was looking at a PowerPoint I put together a year ago, and your lovely quote that you have that still stands the test of time of where we are in our childhood system. And I just wanted to take a moment to say how much KDHE has appreciated your work on the systems improvement team, and everything that you have done has really mattered. I hope I can say when I decide to retire that I've mattered to the system as much as your work has. So just wanted to take a moment as we start and thank you for all that you have done. And I know there's lots of hearts, there's lots of comments in the chat. So Riva, I'm not going to put you on the spot and make you say anything, but I just wanted to let you know how much I've personally appreciated your impact and compassion and empathy for the work that we do every single day. You epitomize why the CCSIT team exists. So just wanted to have that moment. So thank you, Riva, for all that you've done. All right, now that I've had, I feel like I'm gonna even tear up, had that moment. I'm gonna just again, welcome everybody. And as we sort of embody our inner Riva, let's get together and look at how we can, and talk about how we are improving the early childhood system. And I'm going to just pass the baton right over to Allison, our A&P staff, and go over the new proposed regulations that we would love to share with you guys. So Allison, take it away.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all again. I'm Allison Dalrymple. I am the Administration and Policy Director here within the Bureau of Family Health at KDHE, as well as the Deputy Bureau Director. If you were here last month, we kind of did an introduction into our regulation review and elicited some feedback from our CCSIT team, and then shortly after our childcare providers. So this meeting kind of serves as an update on some further progression that we've made or some changes that we've discussed after receiving some feedback. So again, everything that we're discussing today is proposed changes, draft language, nothing set in stone, but definitely just want to see with some changes and edits that we've made where our stakeholders and regulated communities sit on the like ideas. So without further ado, we'll get started. Some of these slides are the first like 3 or 4 are the same as before. We're not doing that awesome video, although again, that's still posted on our childcare licensing website. Here's a quick agenda of today. It mirrors last time. So we have general updates. We're going to talk about some updates to qualification, capacity tables for homes, ratio and capacity for centers, and then some next steps and to-do items. So again, for those who weren't here last month, we'll do a real quick round of introductions since some of the staff are kind of newer here. So I'll let Derek introduce himself.
Morning, guys. Derek Flerlog. I'm the Bureau Director here, the Bureau of Family Health at KDHE. Started in February. For those of you that weren't here on the first meeting we had, it seems like a couple weeks ago. I guess it wasn't too long ago. And just continued excitement for the direction that we're heading here. Also really just proud of the work that the childcare licensing team here at KDHE, if I could speak glowingly about them for just a moment, proud of the work they've put in, modernizing some stuff, web pages, electronic forms, some of those little things that make a big difference. And actually they're projects that take quite a long time. I'm sure you're not surprised about that. And then also want to speak glowingly too about the work that Allison and Lucas have done as well, just here internally. So for those that aren't aware, the internal regulation meetings that we're having to kind of produce this work, even just PowerPoints like this, it's hours and hours a week. It's Allison. If I had to write a position description for her, 99% of her time, or 95%, save the 5% for other duties, right? 95% of her time would be childcare regulations at the moment. And so I'm just really grateful for her. I'm grateful for Lucas's expertise and his willingness to research and give the information that's needed for us to produce the work, crosswalks, that sort of thing. So I just had to get that gratefulness off my chest this morning. And really excited to have meetings like this with the CCSIT team. We have a provider meeting coming up on Saturday, getting all of this engagement and feedback as much as we can as we kind of move forward into this project. So it's been fun to be part of, and we are looking forward to having a final product. I will say that as well. But you guys play a role in that, so we want your feedback. Don't hold back. We won't be offended. Give us all you got.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, my life is definitely nothing but childcare regulations lately. I actually had dreams about it last night. Like childcare regulations were literally in my dreams. So I see, so Jarvis is next, but I don't see him on our list yet. For those who don't know, Jarvis is our childcare licensing section director. Hopefully most of you are aware of who he is or have met him before. And then I will let Lucas introduce himself.
Hi, folks. I'm Lucas Ryan. I'm the Regulation and Policy Specialist for the Bureau of Family Health. As Derek kind of alluded to, I do a lot of research, a lot of reading, and kind of compiling that research. I've also been kind of tracking the feedback and making sure that we have that included in our process. And you'll see me popping around in the chat during the meeting and things like that, just helping keep things going.
Thank you, Lucas. And then Melissa already introduced herself this morning, and echoing some appreciation for all of our staff. It's really not just me doing all of this work. For every minute that I'm working on these regulations, Melissa and Lucas are in the meeting with me. Just yesterday, we had a 7-hour meeting to discuss childcare licensing regulations just because we had the availability pretty much all day yesterday. So really appreciate the team in working on these regs with me. Okay, so this slide is a mirror of last month. So just again, to reiterate, the purpose of regulations is to reduce the predictable risk of harm to children in a childcare setting. They represent a foundational level of quality, so like the bare minimum that is required to ensure our children are safe in childcare. And then also just noting that Modernizing regulations is crucial to increase the availability of safe and affordable childcare in Kansas. Again, I think this is the last slide that's the same as last month, but just another overview of our categories. Again, category 1 are CCDF items, which we kind of explained the CCDF items last time. Essentially, they are go, no go changes that we had to make in order to comply with CCDF and receive federal funding. Category 2, we are finalizing our internal draft of category 2, which are things like staff qualifications, ratios, capacity, things like that. Category 3 and 4 are pretty similar. It's really just standardizing terms, modernizing, and just making sure that we have foundational standards and current practices for centers, preschools, school age, and drop-in programs. All right, so this slide is actually going to take a little bit of time because we're going to go through each of these items, and these are not all encompassing of the changes that we're making. It's just some of the bigger items that we've heard feedback from our regulated community. I am working on an interpretive guide that kind of goes on a step-by-step basis through the items that we've changed and why. It's pretty expansive, so I'm not quite sure when that'll be released to the public for review, or at least our stakeholders and providers for review, but it is something that I am working on. So first things first, we'll talk about technical certificate or diploma in early childhood. I know that Mary, who is someone that we've contracted to work with on these regulations, did a wonderful job compiling a list of technical certificate or technical programs in the state of Kansas. So we've offered technical certificate or diploma in early childhood, as you've seen last month, as one of the qualifiers for our program directors, just as an additional opportunity for those individuals to receive early childhood specific education and have that be included in a qualifier. So I know we had some questions about what is it, who offers it. We did get a nice list of some of the community colleges in Kansas that offer this program. I believe it's called an early childhood education or technical certificate, but there are a handful of probably between 8 to 10 community colleges right now that offer an early childhood technical certificate or diploma. So just giving a little bit more information about that. We're just modernizing as programs like that continue to grow through like vocational schools, or like I said, community colleges. We're just trying to tailor to the new opportunities created for early childhood specific education. Item 2 is, I know last time we kind of talked about combining a licensed daycare home and a group daycare home into one license type. After having our discussion with the providers and kind of introducing it to them, they were on board with it. And I think we had some good feedback in CCSIT this meeting as well that was for it as well. So us as a bureau are likely going to be moving forward with a single license type for licensed daycare home and group daycare home. And then just again, to reiterate, the reason that those were separated in the past was that there were different training qualifications for the providers in a group daycare home versus a licensed daycare home. And training requirement changes in the past had essentially eliminated that difference. Now the training requirements are the same across the board. And so there's really no difference except for the capacity of one provider versus two provider, essentially. So we're looking at combining those two, and we want to get your feedback on what to call this new license type. So I know based on feedback from the regulated community and our CCSIT and many others as well, that we would like to kind of steer away from daycare for many reasons, but move more towards childcare in general, as it kind of more relates to the profession instead of someone just watching your child. It's much more than that, of course, as we all know. So we've proposed family childcare home. This kind of aligns with some of the national standards. So like Caring for Our Children uses family child care home. NACI uses family child care. Some of the other federal agencies use family child care, but some others say family child care home. The issue that could possibly open up with using the word home at the end is that, of course, we know that some home licenses are being operated out of a commercial facility. So while it is a home license, it's not in a home. And so we were curious to know if, what you guys thought, if we could still include family child care home, or if we should say family child care or family child care facility or program, but kind of what that final title would be for this one license type. So if you guys could just drop in the chat, or if you want to think about it a little bit more, some of your suggestions for what you would recommend calling this new license type for the quote unquote home setting. Just something to think about as we work more towards Cat 2 and kind of combining the home licenses. This next item, so if you can remember last month I'll talk about it here soon too, but with staff qualifications for centers and preschools, we included core competencies for staff. And these things include things like knowledge of child and youth development, knowledge of the regulations governing programs, administrative and supervisory skills, communication, management, like program management, just super foundational items. And we received some feedback on core competencies and whether or not it is, appropriate to put competencies in regulation versus working with our partners at CCSIT. So I will let Derek talk a little bit more about core competencies, where we're at right now and kind of what's going on with them. What we really want to know from this discussion is whether or not core competencies should exist in regulation, or we should partner with CCSIT and steer our providers towards their work.
Yeah, so I'll give just a brief kind of foundational layout of where we're at, and actually there's probably some partners on the call that can give good background as well, hopefully good feedback. So there's kind of two separate pieces of work here. So the first one is us looking at some foundational competencies that we would put into regulations. So and Melissa, Allison, Lucas, Jarvis, whomever, hop in if I don't explain this correctly, but it's kind of the foundational expectation for what a provider is. What is a competency, right? What is that foundational level? There's also, at the same time, there's an additional layer of work that's really in the hands of DCF and CCSIT and some other folks that are working on that as well, that are working on some other core competencies, really from the lens of professional development, workforce development lens. And so I wouldn't call it foundational in that sense. And so really what Allison said is kind of what we're looking at here. We're wrestling between, is it helpful to set kind of foundational competencies in terms of regulation, to actually have that in regulation, or is that confusing with how it would play with competencies that may come from, CCSIT, state agencies, kind of all the partners in that space. And Melissa, I see you come off mute, so go ahead.
And when we look at it, and I think Derek set the tone very well, was understanding that the competencies not to be confused with the work that is already going on in Kansas. And so us labeling it as a competency really added to the confusion, because really what when I was explaining it to our work group, it's, you know, I know our staff surveyors all the time get calls, you know, particularly from boards hiring, you know, what does a good program director look like? What are some skill sets? And so we really we're toying with the idea and would love some feedback of really labeling them, well, maybe not even labeling them a skill set, but using them as a definition rather to the role versus a competency, in the sense that you are a program director. Now current regulation does not outline the difference between in the role of a program director versus a lead teacher versus an assistant staff. And the competencies, or lack of another term, would be skill set, would be embedded in the definition. So if I am a parent, regulations are really for anybody off of the street. So it's not just geared towards the facility, it's geared towards a parent reading them, legal guardian, just the layman on the street. I could pick up and look at that definition and say, oh, these are some of the skills that a program director needs. This is the skills that a lead staff needs. So it's not really a regulation that we would be citing. It would be moving it towards the definition to help guide your work, our work, and provide information to the non-regulated community of that work. Very similar in nature if you look in our definitions of a preschool. We have multiple levels of how we define a preschool, and this defines the work and gives the regulated community and non-regulated community an idea of that skill set for that particular role. I hope that's more that builds upon what Derek was sharing. And again, it's moving that out of the true like regulation, but more into the definition realm where really it should be. So it is not confusing later on with all of the good work that is going on in the state of Kansas regarding competencies for the early childhood system in general.
I appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. And guys, feel free. I think at this point, if you guys want to come off mute and if you have something to say or you want to have a discussion about competencies, this is one of the 3 or 4 items that we really want to elicit your feedback on today in this meeting. So if you guys have any questions or need further elaboration, or if you have an idea, feel free. Now's the time to get off mute and talk.
Allison, I appreciate that. It may be, and this is Patty from CCSIT, and of course we're doing the work around the Kansas core competencies interlaid with the Kansas career pathways as well. May think about it as, as we think about competencies, many times we're thinking about knowledge and behaviors. And so those of which that can be measurable, and skills are more, as we look at skills as abilities, the transferable skills. So I think maybe as we talk about this, we might want to think about defining these as you're talking about, knowing that, our competencies, if they need to be transferable, measurable, I'm assuming in regulation, you would not have, we would not want to have something that needs to be assessed or that, is measurable. So maybe thinking about them as skills, transferable skills that need to be in place, such as specific learned abilities in order to perform the job versus the knowledge and behavior. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it makes perfect sense, Patty, and that's really where we're looking at it as a baseline. Again, we get surveyors, our district specialist staff who are providing all of those initial on-site consultation of, it's really hard to quantify what does a good program, what skill set does a program director need versus a teacher. And when we were doing research, some states actually do call that out. It's just, where do we land on putting that and not confusing the work that, as you just eloquently shared, CCSITs, with the core competencies, and have it be really just what you said, that skill set. And I appreciate you summed it up much better than I did. So I appreciate you sharing that and echoing exactly, I think, where our program is wanting to go, because we don't want it to be a punitive in nature. Regulation does not have to be punitive. It's a guide. It's really a foundation. And so really putting that, embedding it so that it's helpful and not hurtful. I feel like I'm talking to my teenage daughter. Was that helpful or hurtful? But that's really what we want to do. We want to be helpful. We don't want it to be embedded in regulation so that it's hurtful to the workforce. So again, appreciate all of the comments.
Yeah,
Bernie, I
absolutely.
see your hands up.
Sorry, Allison, were you going to say something?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. I really appreciated what Patty was saying about skills, because that's something you can put on a list, right? That people can look at. But it also kind of made me think a little bit about things like, just because we look at, regulation as minimum safety standards, essentially. And we always define it that way. Best practice is kind of another body of information. But I'm thinking even in terms of like the health assessment requirements, if we had kind of a list of what those minimum kind of skills required to perform duties are, it may even help with things like the health assessment, because I think that's one of the things that we look at, is like, it's really general. People walk into a doctor's office and they're supposed to say yes they can or yes they can't care for children, and the physicians or the PAs, or they don't really know what that means. And it would provide for more information for even things like like having a cleared health assessment and things for providers, and a basis to do those things.
Thank you. Yeah, so I know that we've been calling them core competencies as we discuss them. Just speaking back to Patty's point, we could certainly rename what they are. Skills and knowledge, or there's a couple of knowledge points, but 3 of them are skills. And this is just for program director I'm talking about. There's competencies for program director, lead teacher, and then assistant teacher. In regulation, as it's drafted right now, it doesn't have any title. It just says they shall demonstrate the following. So it's more of like our internal discussion of what we call them. So we can certainly reframe those if it is decided that these should stay in regulation as that foundational, because while it is the minimum for health and safety, there's plenty of arguments that can be made that, like Bernie said, these core competencies really do tie into minimum health and safety of the children. So good discussion there. If you have any—
And Patty's feedback, I was going to say, Allison, Patty, thank you for that. You really helped me kind of shift the way that I was thinking about it as well, in terms of like transferable skills and things. So helpful.
Yeah, totally. If you guys have any other thoughts on the idea of whether or not we should add core competencies or leave it to our partners at DCF and CCSIT to kind of manage, then totally just throw that in the chat or send us an email. And we can certainly discuss it as a group. So the next item is that in licensed daycare homes and group daycare homes, we moved the maximum age that's often referenced in regulation from 11 years to 10 years. So this includes things like in our capacity table, which I'll show you later, as well as the minimum age, or I guess the maximum age, that at what point having your kids' friends over for a certain amount of hours, when do they start counting in capacity? So we've lowered that down to 10 years, and this aligns with our KBI fingerprinting requirements, as well as some other pieces of regulation we have sprinkled throughout, such as medication in some regs needs to be out of reach for children 10 years and younger. So it kind of just aligns across the board. We've also received feedback that should be changed to 10 years. So that's something that we kind of did. It gives flexibility and in our home providers to have one extra year where kids can come over and not necessarily be counted in capacity if they're within the parameters. So that's something we did to just kind of align across our program types. So if you have any questions or any feedback on changing 11 to 10 for our home setting. Perfect. And if you do, go ahead and just drop it in the chat and we'll, I have it pulled up. I'm going to try to, I'm super bad at monitoring the chat for like any of our meetings. So I'll try to be sure to be super cognizant to look at that. Again, I think we updated this last time as well, but just to reiterate, we did move away from just a health assessment to more of a health status form in general regulation, which means this applies to both the home setting and centers and preschools. So instead of a health assessment when you start employment, you now fill out a form yourself. It's just a health status form. You do it once a year, and then you keep that on file. If for any reason your health or mental capacity or anything is like changes significantly, at that point, you would be directed, or the provider or staff member would be directed to get a health assessment by a licensed provider at that point. So just to reiterate that is something that we would like to move forward with. It reduces the cost burden of our employees, and I don't know, I feel like it just reduces the burden of having someone need to go to the doctor's office to get the health assessment done when they can just fill out the form themselves at the facility. And it also ensures that it's updated health information. The assessment was a one and done thing, unless something significantly changed. So the annual health status form really ensures that the staff members update their health status annually, just to stay more on top of whether or not they're able to care for children. The next item, super happy to say we've drafted that we're going to remove the pit bull ban in general regulation, which applies to home centers and preschools. This was something that we received a lot of feedback on super recently. This was definitely something that kind of has always been since we started this regulation review. Even back in 2017, it was proposed to be removed when we had some pre-edits going on. But that is something that we've proposed to be removed from regulation. So I feel like that's like a super small win, but a lot of people have voiced their opinion just on that specifically. Next, we have the addition of transition periods in centers and preschools. And so what this is it kind of more aligns in regulation what's already being kind of done in practice. And so, for example, if you have an infant who is a couple weeks away from turning 1 and they're about to move up into the next room and they're walking and all that fun stuff, we have drafted into regulation that there is a 2-week transition period on either side of their birthday that they can essentially spend some time in the next room up and not be sighted. And so, for example, my daughter, right before she turned 1, they wanted to transition her into the older room. So she got used to it, acclimated to the room and the kids in there. So they wanted to take her in there for an hour or 2 a day just to get her used to that environment. So this is now, and it's kind of been accepted in practice throughout our centers and preschools, but it wasn't in regulation. And so that was something we added for more flexibility within centers. Any questions so far? Yeah, yes, Nicole. We have all aggressive animals should not be around children, including like if your Chihuahua attacks people, then yes, it should not be. It's not specific to any breed. It's just any animal who may cause harm should not be around children.
I have a question about this transition. I know you said 2 weeks. is that something that could be expanded even more? And this was one of those things that was just kind of in the back of my mind. I know that saving a spot for a child that's getting ready to move into another room gets really challenging sometimes for childcare centers. And if additional flexibility around that can be included in regulation, it seems like that could be a really important financial support to programs so that they're not, you know, they're filling their openings a little bit quicker. I don't know what's realistic, and clearly we want what's best for children. So I'm not saying anything goes, but is 30 days on either side of that birthday acceptable? Or, you know, maybe it's how rooms are licensed. Maybe there's some overlap on ages. I just think that's really something to consider as you're redoing regulations.
No, I appreciate
Well,
that.
Yeah, Riva, if you could give us an example, I think that would be helpful, because we also have to overlap it with state fire marshal approval for the rooms, and just making sure unfortunately, it gets really complicated really fast with the terms of license and guiding that. Because I think I'm just a little, and I would just love clarification, a little confused by your comment on saving spots, because we really just want what's best for the child, right? To make sure that they're developmentally ready to go into the room. And unfortunately, we do see some instances where children are pushed forward when they're really not ready to go into that room. And then we realize they're not walking, all of these things. So we try to use what I just like to label common sense when we're out in the field, asking lots of good questions, to not be punitive when it comes to transitioning. Because again, we all want what's best for children. And we as a program have been struggling with looking at what is appropriate language, how does it align with our license, because really the license is a good guide. So if you have any language that you see that other states have used, anything that even what you would re-envision in the state of Kansas, we would really welcome some of that input, because that has, you know, we really want to make sure that we're capturing it well, but that then the surveyor who's on site doing it also understands at the same time. Because again, some of our facilities, their licenses are very complicated. And so just trying to make sense of it. So again, if you have time in your free time, Riva, if you have some language to help us look at, I think Allison and our group would really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Well, I
for
will be
sure.
happy to send something, but I'm sure there's people on this call that are center directors that have more insight than I do. I just know that sometimes, like a child that's getting ready to have a birthday, a 2-year-old that's getting ready to turn 3, they're having to save an open spot in that classroom, knowing that child's going to be moving in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and it's impacting their ability to maintain full enrollment. So Bernie, I see you've got your hand up. Maybe you've got some additional insights.
Yeah, I think mine's maybe like a walk alongside that, but I have a specific example, and Melissa, I appreciate like wanting to not overcomplicate licenses and things, but I have a situation right now where I have a 2-year-old who's turning 3 in a few weeks, but is also leaving our program to go to district preschool a month later, or I think not even a month later. So we're in a situation where it is not in the best interest to, in his best interest to transition him right before a big transition in his life. But that's what we have to do, because he's going to age out of the classroom that he's in before he leaves our program. And that's just kind of a concrete. But I'm thinking too of those times when we have a child who is of age to move up, but maybe not quite developmentally ready, that we would love some flexibility, you know, and I know there's always a line between like, you know, the best for the child. And then if we open things up too much, there may be, you know, programs that don't necessarily do things in the interest of the children, but a little bit more flexibility, like what Riva is talking about, would actually help us to kind of follow the developmental needs of children. And I'm thinking about, you know, we try to be an inclusive center, and sometimes that means that, you know, and we don't want to hold children back if they're not completely on par with development, but sometimes, you know, keeping them in the space that they're familiar with a little bit longer is appropriate. And so there's just kind of those situations that happen that a little bit more flexibility in our license would help us to navigate.
Bernie, I always think about even just the summertime, those preschoolers who are transitioning to kindergarten, where do they land and where do they go? And so I do appreciate that flexibility comments, because I myself worry about, is this in the best interest of the child to move up, or where do we land, or where are we going? I don't know what that looks like. I mean, Allison has done an amazing job echoing Derek of pushing us to say these are different thought processes, these are different ways, you know, maybe do we need to I hate to say this, that throw out the baby with the bathwater, you know, throw and just start over in Kansas to something that looks different. So these are all questions that are uncomfortable, which I think are good though, because it pushes our program to be more inclusive to where we want to land, to provide that maximum flexibility to programs. So I really appreciate all the comments. So if and I know, Bernie, you've also worked in Nebraska, you've looked at you've had the luxury of looking at different states' license and how they do that. So if there's anything you want to share to help guide us, I know Allison and the A&P and the child care licensing program would definitely appreciate that.
Absolutely. And just before I ask Kelly to speak, I do want to say that, and whether or not this holds any real merit, I don't know, but the regulation as it's drafted states that both the parent and legal guardian, and then the licensee or applicant with the TP, both have to agree that the child should transition wherever that they both agree on the transition if there should be one. So I know there was concern that hopefully that would stave concerns of the center pushing forward children before they're ready to open up another. I use the infant slot because that's what I'm more recently familiar with as a parent, but just so everyone's aware, it does say in there that the parents and legal guardians and the licensee need to agree. All right, Kelly.
I was just going to add that I appreciate the conversation around looking at what's developmentally in the best interest of the child, and also that maybe we do need to start over in Kansas. And I don't think we should shy away from, even if there aren't other states doing it, working together to develop a system that is inclusive. And if the first step is a longer transition period, maybe that's a solid first step, because I think, you know, helping kids move into the next classroom gives them more experiences, a different environment, different peers, different motivation to help spur their development, but also it gives the tiny case staff or the education staff time to get into those classrooms to say, okay, here's what's going well. Here are the things we need to problem solve. Let's try a few things and see if we can't help this placement move forward. Because I think one of the hardest things I see is when children aren't moving with their peers simply because of their motor skills. And I think that is more damaging than anything we could possibly come up with here. And also, sometimes the center staff then feel an immense amount of pressure to work with the child. So recently we worked with a center that did move them up, but they felt such intense pressure to do it in a short time that it backfired, and the child's experience was terrible and regressed. And it took us almost double the time to sort of overcome that in a way that, you know, eventually he got there. So that's just, I just appreciate the opportunity to look at it differently here and be inclusive, and, you know, all means all.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, if there's any other suggestions, and Kelly, if you want to send us an email or put it in the chat, what you think, because I know you said maybe lengthening the transition period is the good first step. What you think that time period should be as well. So like, just get like all the ideas we would love to have and to table, roundtable discuss. I do want to note, we did have a key difference between moving the child up in a transition period. Some of our discussions ended up like growing into, I guess, two different types of like quote unquote transition periods. And so one is moving the child up period based on like where they're at developmentally, and the other is a transition to like get the child used to the next room but then bring them back in type thing. So there are two different kind of definitions that sometimes the surveyors use, and then the program, and then what the average person understands as a transition period. And so any thoughts behind like a transition period to get the child used to the next room versus just allowing that flexibility to move children up as needed based on their developmental status. So just something to think about based on our current or internal discussions that we've had based on the topic. And I know it looks like it's nighttime. The sky like went completely dark in the middle of this meeting, so it looks like I'm sitting. Yeah, it looks very dark in here, so it is.
You are sitting in the dark, Allison.
I know, right? I have a tiny lamp, but it doesn't do too well. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so the next item is so as some of you may be aware, there are specific qualifications, additional qualifications for staff in infant toddler rooms. Or is it just infant? Melissa, do you know?
Infant toddler regulations
Infant
currently
toddler
now are
together.
different. Yeah.
Okay,
They're
cool.
bundled together.
Yep. So there is specific training geared towards infant toddlers. Things like a CDA in specifically infant and toddler like topics, as well as like an RN is one of the options. So there's just, I think, 3 options specifically geared towards someone working in an infant toddler unit. Must have, at least one person must have one of those qualifications to qualify. What we've done is remove those additional qualifications, knowing that that creates an education gap that should still be there, and training and competency gap for those caring for infants. So what we've done is kind of, again, proposed to remove those additional qualifications, open it to just a regular lead staff. And I'm comparing this person to lead staff because it's kind of a higher echelon of provider. But in order to maintain that specific training that like the infant population requires, is to, in their 16 annual in-service hours, require that a handful of those hours must be in an infant and toddler topic, or just infant topic, depending on where it lands. And so this kind of allows more people to join the workforce of the infant like room, while growing their education into infant and toddler specific items and trainings that again, infants, they're more finicky. You need to know more things about infants. They're more susceptible. They're learning a whole bunch. So we definitely want to still recognize that they need a higher echelon of education. But again, this kind of opens up the field to where a lead teacher may apply for that position, and then just gain that training while they're employed. And just having like maybe 4 to 6 hours out of their already required 16 to be in infant specific topics if they're in the infant room. So any thoughts geared towards that? Safety concerns? glaring one being that if you open up a new center and you start someone right away, they're not going to have that infant specific training. So there's a little bit of a gap that would be there, that someone may not have that training that that used to be there before they get that first set of in-service hours. Other than that, any input, I'm open for suggestions or questions about this. Or feedback in general. Yay or nay? No feedback yet. Okay. We heard that having someone be an RN in the room was kind of just a little much. As someone had requested that it be moved down to like a CNA as being a possible employee in the infant room, but we kind of just completely changed gears to just switching it to more specific annual in-service training for infants. So if you guys, while you mull that over and you think about it, if you can think of any concerns, safety issues, training issues, or if you think that it's sufficient, then totally let us know. Yeah, the new centers, so they wouldn't require, and just replying to T. Donovan's question, you wouldn't already need to have the 4 hours of annual in-service before you're hired. You would just come in as a lead teacher in the infant room, and then throughout that first year, when you have to do your annual in-service training, then you would gain that infant specific training. So again, that first year would be possibly more risky to not have that additional training. So just something to think about. But again, it opens the door for more people to, or more applicants to start in the infant room as that lead person.
And just to echo about the training that you were sharing, Allison, we have, reminding everybody that anybody moving within our workforce, they have to take 16 hours every year, and many of them do have already training content in infant toddler, and might be in the preschool room, and this may give them the ability to transition to that lead teacher in a different way and manner than before. So again, even our current workforce has a lot of this training already in place.
Absolutely. And Adrian, good question. So right now we have it just for that lead staff member because that's what is currently in regulation. It was the one person needed to have a CDA and infant specific or be an RN and had cared for infants in the past. So we left it as just the one person. I would totally recommend or consider having all infant staff take this training. It's not an increased burden because they already have to do 16 hours of annual in-service training. And so why not just have them do 4 to 6 of it in that infant toddler specific age, whatever room that they're in. That's definitely something to consider. Yeah, I think we got some good feedback on having everyone take the training. So yeah, I like the idea. I mean, it's not additional training requirements. It's just, if you're taking the training, it should be in this specific topic. So that's good. Cool. Heather, we didn't discuss having that training within a certain period of time, but similar to completing orientation and health and safety training, it's something that we can consider doing just to mitigate that risk that I had just talked about. We could do something like within the first 30 days, but we'd have to, I think, get input from our program directors and different staff members to see if 4 to 6 hours of training within the first 30 days, in addition to the orientation and regular health and safety training, would just be a bit much initially, or if it would be okay or an undue burden, or so it's definitely something to think about. And again, we're recording all of your suggestions and we will roundtable them during our next meeting, which is today, this afternoon. Cool. Okay. Next item is, I think I talked about this last time because I added it in the home setting, I believe. But we've also added breastfeeding and breast milk specific handling and storage and usage. And now it's in centers, preschools, and the home setting. It's just modernizing language. It tells you how many hours to store breast milk, how long you need to use it by once they've started feeding, all of that fun stuff. We've just built out more breast milk versus formula language. There is a specific point in here, and we've partnered with or we've asked for feedback from our partners at the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition. And one of the bullet points that they recommended that we add to our regulation is comfortable seating for a parent to breastfeed their child at both the center and the home, centers, preschools, and homes. We're kind of curious to get your guys' feedback on if that's something that is appropriate to add to regulation, or if it would be an undue burden on the centers. It wouldn't be mom wants to come and have lunch with the kid every day for lunch or feed them bottles. It is strictly for breastfeeding purposes, and that they have to provide a comfortable seat for that parent. So just to get your guys' feedback on this specific topic, any thoughts or concerns, or whether or not you think it's a good idea, we're open for your feedback. Do we think it would it be disruptive to the care happening in the center, or what? Kelly, you came off mute. Do you have a?
I just had it. So to clarify, are you saying this would impact both family, childcare and center-based?
Yes. Both of them would just have the way it's drafted right now. It just says a comfortable seat must be provided for a parent to breastfeed their child, period, pretty much.
I'm a big proponent of breastfeeding. And I know the value of that. My only concern is that in a home or sometimes in community settings, trying to find private space is going to potentially create a burden if this becomes part of a regulation rather than a recommendation.
So we don't quantify that it has to be private, Kelly, because most of our centers now just let the mom come in and breastfeed within the unit, and facilities have done that. We're not quantifying that it has to be private, because I don't, exactly to your point, we don't want it to be a burden. And in most of our breastfeeding facilities right now, even with our new builds, they're not adding on mom rooms as much as they're just adding an extra rocking chair within the units, because that's a business practice, and we would want that ownership to go back to the business. But we're just saying that if you have to have some type of comfortable seating for breast to allow breastfeeding. But again, it doesn't have to be an extra burden on the facility to have it be private. Is that clarification a little bit more helpful, or just wanting to make sure? Because I love that you're advocating for the feedback for the providers, and I want to make sure we get it right.
Yeah, I guess it probably then depends on what the definition of comfortable would be.
Right.
That's kind of a
Yep.
an iffy, squishy term, but
right.
Again,
it could be sitting on a floor, could be a provider saying that. So definitely appreciate that.
Absolutely. And we had that in the chat too from Bethany. We had discussed that. We actually did discuss internally comfortable whether or not to add that. It's kind of subjective. I think the gist of what it's supposed to mean is like not the floor, not like a no back stool or something. Just, I don't know. So it's hard. Yeah, definitely. And I think there was a comment in here that said that, you know, they already have to have rocking chairs and centers. And then most homes have like a couch or a chair in the living room or something similar to that. So is it undue? Is it too much to add to regulation because comfortable seating probably most likely is already present? I think it's just a piece that really advocates for breastfeeding. And I think part of it is that support and advocating appropriate in regulation versus just making sure they have what they need to breastfeed their child. And so I think we just wanted to have a good discussion on thoughts behind it. So
I
yeah.
think also, I mean, and I know there were some comments in the chat about then encouraging parents to come in, and I know that's partially a business choice, but we do have to allow access regardless, for parents to come have access to their children throughout the time they're with us. So, I mean, I think it almost adds, I think most of the components of what that would encourage are kind of addressed in other areas, like others have said. I mean, and I'm, you know, advocate breastfeeding as well, but I'm not sure that it needs to be in regulation in that way. Perfect.
Thank you. This is exactly the feedback that we were wanting. So we will discuss that and yeah, incorporate your feedback into it and see where to go from there. The last item that's like before we get to qualifications and ratios and things is annual in-service training hours for seasonal school age program staff. So currently, actually, Melissa, would you want to talk about this one? It was really Melissa's idea to stem from or to discuss this and kind of think about whether or not we can change it or realign somewhere else. She had a really good idea that I think a lot of us may be on board with, but it's hard to get to that final product for this specific item.
And this is really geared towards our, so I'm glad I have Dawn on today and some of our school age program. We received some feedback, lovely, very detailed feedback of our summer-based camps, and we actually licensed them as summer-based. Some of our SAPs are very seasonal operational, and these could be our building-based school age programs. It could be our mobile, and then again, we have our summer camps. And if Dawn's group is bringing back staff from the year before and they're only working for 3 months, what does the annual in-service hours look like? Because they've already received their orientation. So I'm moving forward from the intent that they've already received the orientation, because remember, our orientation in our school age programs align with our health and safety training. So the goal was that they were receiving all of that lovely 16 hours right up front with orientation. But if Dawn's group and what we've been challenged with is bringing back a staff from last year, what do their annual in-service hours look like when they're only really working 3 months out of the year and the program is only operational for 3 months out of the year? We may not be able to tackle this in this capacity. This is something, you know, we do have our school age programs and our drop-in programs for category 4, but really wanting to elicit feedback from the whole system, because then we, you know, don't want to, well, I have staff who only work 9 months. What does that look like? And, you know, wanting to be equitable across program types, but also recognizing we do have some license types that we really only function in the summertime. So again, I don't know if we're going to get this answer today. We wanted to throw this out to you guys for feedback, and if this possibly might be a more small group work within our school age programs and drop-in programs. Well, drop-in programs, you know, they're not even required to have annual hours, but our school age programs are. So just wanted to start the conversation and really acknowledge that we heard your comments and wanted feedback from, many of you guys have worked in school age programs, have managed school age programs, may not be your current process now. And what does that world look like? And it could also be looking at more flexibility in what is determined by, as approved training from the secretary, and being more flexible within our training mechanism for our approval process for our school age staff. So again, just wanting to throw that out there as something, because we've heard this more than once, as something, and I see that the chat is blowing up. So I appreciate the conversation and the comments, but knowing that we are trying to elicit feedback and trying to do what is best for our staff, because we still have an expectation that staff receive training, and what does that look like? But then also wanting to honor what does that look like in very short-term operational programs who are unique across the state.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's
I'm
just,
just, yeah,
yeah,
I'm
go
just
ahead.
reading I'm just reading the comments. So I will continue and let you go on, Allison.
Perfect.
And Allison, I would, the way that I was just kind of maybe to contribute to folks' thought process on that, I had been thinking of those kind of seasonal employees in kind of a similar manner as lifeguards, and what they're required to do. Lifeguards still have to meet certain requirements. There's obviously an age requirement there. And then there's actually some health and fitness requirements that they have to meet annually too. But I think the broader training requirements, they only have to complete, once, like to get their certification or whatever it is. I did put some feelers out there to Parks and Rec to kind of learn about that. And some of you may be familiar with that as well in your respective industries and facilities. So anyways, I've been thinking of it in kind of that manner, but we don't want to be a barrier. So
Absolutely. Yeah, we've heard some feedback that 16 hours for staff who work 3 months out of the year is a bit much. So we definitely want to, again, like Melissa said, tailor to the workforce and reduce some burnout and burden, but also, again, make sure that the kids are safe. I mean, they have this training for this reason. So at what point is that sweet spot between ensuring the kids are safe and reducing the burden on the staff in the school age program? And so that's kind of what we want to get feedback on for the annual in-service training for our seasonal school age programs. And that's kind of, I think, how we would frame it as seasonal specific. So just throwing that out there, we'll hit school age program a little bit deeper in category 4, which coming faster than I can fathom. So we'll definitely be reaching out with our school age program partners, but we also just want to get general feedback from our SIT as well. Okay, so into qualifications, and then we'll do some ratios and capacity tables. This is very similar to what we proposed last month. The only change that we've made is in yellow. So you'll see on the left, this is our program director qualifications for centers and preschools for quote unquote large centers, so 24 plus children. What we heard or found out was originally we had 5 and 6 were just kind of one qualification. It was a CDA plus 4 years. And we heard that was a bit much. So we ended up tailoring it back down, separating those two out, doing a CDA plus 1 year of experience, and then separating 4 years of experience. We originally had 4 years of experience on there because, again, we want to tailor education-based strengths all the way down to experience-based strengths and everything in between. And so originally we had experience plus some form of formal education. Now that we've separated those two, it can be argued that we're still missing that little bit of formal education or enough experience where you really don't need that education. And so what is that sweet point for 4 years of experience? Is it a few credit hours? Is it a technical certificate from a vocational school? Is it just like 5, 6, or 8 years? I know some other states did 8 years as their experience with no other form of education. And so what does that look like now that we've kind of split out the CDA from the 4 years of experience? Is that enough? So we really just kind of want to get your feedback specifically on bullet point 6 for large centers, what that experience heavy qualification looks like. This is early childhood experience of Bernie. So it's caring for, like, providing direct care and supervision to children for that piece of experience. And it's 4 years of experience in providing direct care and supervision to children as well. So all of the experience, and we'll have to spell out a little bit more specifically what we mean by experience. We don't want to exclude, for example, your practicum hours when you're getting your degree. I mean, that's experience. You're physically there, you're working with the children, whether or not you're employed there, shouldn't matter. You're still hands-on with the children. So it's really just experience being in that environment and seeing how it works, and being near children. So it is not specifically licensed childcare. So I know we have that policy exception for experience, that it doesn't have to be licensed childcare. There are plenty of programs out there that provide the same amount of experience, but is not licensed. We do recognize those programs and those experiences. It's currently, like I said, a policy exception that we have now worked on incorporating this into reg. So it does not say it has to be from a licensed facility. Did I miss any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at number 2, a bachelor's in a non-related field in 9 semester hours, compared to number 4, where I'm assuming 12 credit hours is the same thing as 9 semester hours. Is that right? No, different. What is it?
Sorry, they meant to be the same. So semester hours and credit hours are synonymous.
Okay. I'm just curious why, I'm wondering if 3 and 4 should be the same, if 9 credit hours in early childhood is sufficient. I'm not sure why a bachelor's in a non-related field takes that down by a class, essentially. Because I mean, your bachelor's could be in something 100% unrelated.
Mm-hmm.
But if we feel like 9 credit hours is sufficient in 2, I would propose that 9 credit hours would be sufficient in 4, or at least they should match.
Okay, that makes sense. Totally. Okay, so either increase the 9 semester hours in 2 to 12, or lower the semester hours in 4 to 9 is what you're saying. Okay, that's good feedback. Definitely. Thank you. And yeah, we did, like, for number 2 in a non-related field, and this is not to slight any job or profession or anything like that, but we often said, like, if you have a degree in dance or pottery making, what do you need to be a childcare provider director, program director? So we definitely went, like, completely non-related to anything early childhood, and how we can get them to that point. So.
And I also don't know that more is always better. So I'm not sure, like, if you looked at a community college, are there 4 different classes on child development that are reasonable to take within the same semester if one person wanted to do this in one semester, or is 9 acceptable you know, without knowing, you know, the higher learning institutions requirements, I don't know if there are 12 credit hours that I could knock out in the fall if I wanted to, but there could be. I just don't have that information. And I would just suggest that when you're deciding between 9 or 12, that might be something to look at.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Yeah, we definitely like being like, if we have two things that we're trying to equalize, and it's currently in reg, we'll always go with the least restrictive. And so we'll look at what we currently have in reg for our bachelor's in non-related field, if we have that, and then the 12 credit hours, and see what it currently states. If it's not in there, then we can tailor it to what we need. If it's in there, we'll go to the least restrictive for sure. Okay, so we think that 4 years of experience by itself is not enough. So what does that look like to get them to that point where they essentially, what we're trying to do is experience wise, they're equivalent to a bachelor's degree in early childhood. How many years do you need to work, or years plus any extra education you would need to work or take to get equivalent to a bachelor's degree in that field? And we could do something similar to, if we're going all the way, like, let's say someone threw out 8 years of experience is enough to equate a bachelor's degree, possibly. That could be an option, or you can say 4 years plus so many credit hours. It doesn't have to be just one item. It could be different things to get you to that point of the experience piece.
Allison, I guess is the thought, and maybe this is to Reva's comment, that we would like remove 6 altogether there and just have we could count experience, but you'd also need some sort of certificate or well, not just experience, but something, I guess, formal. We would remove like number 6 altogether.
That could be an idea if we wanted to go that route. I do know that we had some feedback. I can't remember. I get the provider presentation and the SIT presentation mixed up from last month because they were very similar within a week of each other. I know someone had recommended or asked that if you've ran a home business for so many years, that you should theoretically be qualified to run, I think they said a large center, but I think it would more equate to a small center, that you would qualify as a program director for a small center if you've ran your home daycare for 4 years or whatever. So I think that's the piece that we were trying to speak to. Those who, and this isn't just that specific education or experience specifically, but if someone had ran their own home daycare for 25 years, would they then qualify for a program director of a center of some sort? So I think that's what we were trying to get at. I mean, we're open to like options. We can make it experience in a licensed center just for that piece. I'm not sure, because that would require them to have the 4 years of annual in-service training, which could count towards their education, or their 16 hours of annual in-service training every year for 4 years if they were in a licensed center. But I mean, we're completely open to ideas. I think, yeah. So Lynette, 6 years, we can throw that out there. Like I said, one of the other states had 8 years that we researched. So,
and I mean, you can,
yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong, Allison, but then there's the additional requirements at the bottom right too. Because that's what I was thinking, you know, if you're 24 kids, right? If you're 24 children, there's a difference between 24 children and 101, you know, so.
absolutely.
And I guess my thought process, just from my perspective, would be if we're going to cut out, hypothetically, if we're going to cut out experience altogether, would want a very clear path, I guess, for someone to obtain whatever they needed to obtain to
Mhm.
become that.
Director. And I did want to, the bottom right-hand corner, the additional requirements still in effect. That was not on my presentation last month. I left it off because it wasn't something that we touched or messed with, but a lot of people interpreted that we got rid of it. We did not get rid of it. It's still there. If you have more than 100 kids, as a program director, you need to have 1 year of experience as a program director in a small center, or 1 year of experience as an assistant director. And then for more than 100 kids, you need an assistant director, and then more than 160, an assistant director with no other responsibilities. That's still in play. And then also wanted to note that professional development for both program directors, that 6 out of their 16 clock hours need to be in some kind of business type, management, administration type of topic, for the continuity of the business itself. We definitely want our centers to stay open. And I know that some of that can be a burden if you don't have that background. Bernie.
Yeah, I just didn't want to type all this in the chat, but I know there's always that kind of discussion about like what experience counts, how much experience. And I know that there's concern about removing an experience only option, but what if there was like a splitting of the difference as far as and I'm thinking even of the CDA, the CDA offers credit hour, clock hour, like multiple requirements for kind of that education component. So could there be alternative routes to kind of showing that you have some, and I know it was said that, the in-service requirements of having 4 years of experience, but if there's alternatives to how you get that 4 years of experience, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you have those clock hours. So could we say these are things that could count for clock hours, or in these topics, or add something in to that experience, or to that kind of meets in the middle?
Yeah, I think it was, we had a discussion with one of our stakeholders, I think it was last week. I think it was proposed to do like 4 years of experience plus like 30 clock hours of in-service training, but that's very specific if you're not already a licensed provider. All right. So like how to equate that into something else if you haven't been a provider. So definitely a discussion that we've had. We've been really trying to narrow down the staff qualifications and the capacity tables. We had an 8-hour meeting last week just to discuss these 3 items. So definitely on the forefront of our mind, trying to get nailed down to a good compromise, middle ground that again is good for the safety of the kids. Also elicits a good business model. We want the daycares or childcare facilities to stay open while still maintaining that safety piece and competency for our program directors. So it's hard. Yeah.
And I think it's a fine line for us evaluating, like, what would we, if we were running a large center, who would we hire for that, versus what kind of foundations do we want, across the state in childcare in general. So it's like Allison said, it's been a lot of long discussions that Allison and Melissa Jarvis, Lucas, and the team have had. So a lot of thought.
And we want to really honor the workforce. So just please keep that in mind, that we definitely want to make sure that we are staying foundational while honoring the workforce and keeping the door open. So please, this is why Allison has dreams about regulations. So please keep adding to her dreams. Please give us more feedback, and we just continue to want to grow and make sure we find what's right for Kansas facilities.
Absolutely. Kelly and Bernie, if you guys have any ideas about what that additional type of experience looks like, that's not formal training, if you have any ideas, or if you can think about if you were to hire a program director, with what would that piece look like, please send that our way. This is one of the 3 very hot button items that like we've talked about a lot lately. So yeah, I appreciate it. So that was the only change that we've made since the last time that we presented this. And again, we'll look at that semester hour difference between item number 2 and 4 on the large center. But yeah, if you have any additional questions or input, drop it in the chat or send us an email. So this hasn't changed at all. This is just in here because we're talking about centers and preschools for program directors. So I just want to continue it with lead teachers and assistant teachers. Same exact as what we proposed last month. I'll give you just a second to review it just so it's fresh in your mind. All right. Okay, so this is something that's new. Staff qualifications for school age programs. So this is where our school age program partners come into play. So currently, school age program qualifications, they cross-reference center and preschool program director qualifications. Essentially, they kind of mirror each other, and then school age program has like some additional different type of qualifications. We want to separate those two completely. School age program and centers and preschools are not similar in general, like at all. And we really just kind of want to take any reference to centers in the school age program, remove it, and then just make sure it's spelled out specifically in school age programs rather than referencing to centers. So what we've done is propose some staff qualifications for the program director and kind of the assistant group leader and group leader on the right-hand side. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So program director on the left, what we did was we looked at, since it currently tied to centers and preschools, we looked at those new qualifications that we've introduced, as well as like those extra couple of options they had in school age programs, such as 3 months experience for a program director of less than 31 children. We took the least restrictive item for both education and experience, and that's what we came up with. So for program director, after reviewing everything that they could have to be a program director for less than 31 children, it came down really just to 3 months experience. There wasn't really an equivalent credit hour requirement, so we created the idea of 3 credit hours or 3 months experience for the program directors for less than 31 children. For 31 to 60 children, we actually lowered that requirement a little bit. So again, after looking at everything that would qualify you for 31 to 60, we looked at the least restrictive options and threw those out there for credit hours and experience. It used to be, or it currently is, sorry, 15 credit hours or 6 months experience. We lowered that down to 12. And I think that was more to align with the centers, like it was too equivalent, and school age programs are don't have as many requirements as centers. Their programs are completely different. 61 to 120, that's currently what's acceptable as well. 60 credit hours, 12 months experience, or a combination of half of each of those. And then greater than 120 children is a bachelor's degree. So that's kind of where we landed on for program directors for school age programs. We're open to suggestions about credit hours or experience or changing them. And again, you have to be 18 years old and at least 3 years older than the oldest youth in the program. And you have to have a high school diploma or equivalent to be a director, as well as the competencies that currently exist within that regulation, or the skills and knowledge set, which are currently in there. And then real quick, the assistant group leader and group leader, I think there was a, a wording issue that was in those two sections. It stated originally that each assistant group leader shall be under the supervision and direction of a group leader. We changed it to guidance. I think it was interpreted that they needed to be under the supervision as if the same type of supervision that you provide to children. It really wasn't the same. You don't need to have eyes on your assistant group leader 24/7. You just need to be under the guidance and direction of your group leader. So we did change that language to make it easier to follow for everybody. So those were the only changes that we made with school age program staff qualifications. Any questions? And Nicole, I think it's whatever it currently is. I think it's any topic. I can double check real quick. I have my school age program recs right in front of me. 587. It is just academic credit hours is all it states. So any topic. But that's where that 16 hours of annual in-service training was supposed to come in for school age program. So just noting that. I'm just going to take a second to read some of these comments. Mm-hmm. 12 to 60 seems like a big jump. It does, Jennifer. What it was before was 15 to 60. And I think we talked about possibly lowering 60, but also it equates to like half of a degree. So it was weird to lower it to like 45 because it's a weird number of classes. You could take 2 years and that's 60, right? So I think it's been a while since I've been in school. So it was just kind of weird how to place that and lower it and not be like a weird number of semester hour or semesters in general. Any idea? I think you said Jennifer, oh, you said have an option with a 30 credit hour.
Well, I see that there is one. I think maybe the way that it's listed was 60 first and then says or 30 is through me because to be honest, I didn't even notice the 30. So maybe,
oh,
you know,
so it's, yep. So
it
it's
needs
60.
to go 12, then 30, then 60 would maybe, you know.
So the way that this is, it's supposed to be like just 60 credit hours, just 12 months experience, or a combination of 30 credit hours and 6 months experience. So you don't need the full 30. If you have 6 months experience, you can just have, or a full 60. If you have six months experience, you just need 30 credit hours. So it was kind of that middle ground between 60 credit hours and 12 months. So you don't have to do all of one or all of the other. You can do a mix of both. And that's currently in reg as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to clarify. Any input or suggestions, especially from our school age partners, if they're still on the call, any initial gut reactions or thoughts to these suggestions? This is the first time that we've showed these staff qualifications for school age programs to any of our partners. If you have any suggestions, again, I'm going to repeat myself over and over again, just drop it in the chat or send us an email after looking at this a little bit more. Okay, so before we get into home capacity tables, we kind of wanted to set the scene for like where we're at, some possibilities for where to go. Honestly, working in these regulations every single day, what happens is we come up with a table, we like it, and the very next day we open it up and we're like, nope, we can do it better. This needs to change. We like it. The very next day we completely throw a wrench in it and change it again. So it's super hard to come up with good tables that satisfy both the need in Kansas, satisfy the providers, satisfy our stakeholders, and again, ensures the safety of each child in care. So the tables presented to you right now are current tables right now and regulation approved. And I just want to talk about some of the things that have happened or things to consider as we move forward in discussing what the tables look like. So things that would be in favor of increasing capacity or increasing the number of younger children in capacity is that we have increased health and safety training. So we now have the CPR and first aid certifications mandatory for everybody. We have the 16 hours of in-service clock hours. Now 4 of them have to be in a health and safety topic. Increased safe sleep practices, increased quality of supervision plans. A lot of these were a result of Lexi's law. Modernized updated language across regulations is what we're doing right now. And then we are also proposing improved emergency plans and drills. What's working against that proposal of increasing capacity or increasing the number of younger children in care is inadequate supervision, emergency evacuation concerns, lack of one-on-one attention to facilitate really good brain, language, and emotional development, and possibly some more safe sleep violations than what we've currently seen or are currently seeing, as well as I'm sure that there's going to be concerns about not having adequate time to bottle feed the kiddos because you have more, if you have more infants. So just something to note there, just to get you guys to have a foundation of some of the things that are in favor of the changes and some of the things that are working against the changes. So again, these are current tables. Top is 1 provider, bottom is 2 providers. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you what we proposed last month. Just as a recap, we had for 1 provider on the top, pretty much all we did was again, move 18 months down to 12. We received a ton of feedback that is amazing. It's perfect. What's for Kansas? Lots of support with moving an infant down to, or moving 18 down to 12 months. Note that this older age here is still 11 in the 3rd column. And then we essentially moved a child from the 5 to 11 age group where it's red, moved it into the younger category. So instead of 5 and 4, it's now 6 and 3. And instead of 4 and 3, it's now 5 and 2. So we just gave them an extra preschool slot without increasing their license capacity, essentially. On the bottom there with 2 adults, again, what we did last time still changed 18 months down to 12. Note that it's still 11 years of age for the oldest. We added the top row, trying to incorporate table 4, which I'll talk about soon. And again, throughout the whole, all the red in the middle 2 columns, moved 1 child from essentially the 5 to 11 and gave them an extra preschool slot, noting that on the 4 infants, the very bottom row of the 2nd table, we did increase total capacity by 2 to a max of 12 where it used to be 10. So that's what we proposed last month. What we currently proposed this month is on this slide. So it looks a little different. The formatting's a little different. I apologize. The key changes here, note that these are both 1 provider tables. 2 provider we'll get to on the next slide. The 1 provider table, the only additional change that we've made is switch a school age slot to a preschool age slot on the top row for 0 infants, essentially. Is the only change that we've made from our last proposal. So we gave an extra preschool slot if you don't have any infants. The bottom table, we originally didn't touch. But after discussing the center ratios, and I know homes and centers aren't, they're apples and oranges, but just noting the increase in ratio for that center setting, we also saw an opportunity to increase a little bit for the 2.5 to 10 and 3 to 10 year age range by 1. If you have 0 infants, and those 2.5, 3, and 5 are your youngest children in care, this is how many kids you can have total. So you could use either one of these two tables for your license. Noting also that we've lowered the 11 to 10. Any initial thoughts or gut reactions to this proposed table and the changes that are drafted? Bernie.
I guess I have two different thoughts. One is continued concern that by the basis of this chart, a provider could have 8 1-year-olds by themselves in a home. And that continues to be a little bit concerning for me. I mean, 8 13-month-olds or, barely walking children is a lot. But I also question, and you had just mentioned, with table 2, looking at, center ratios versus the family child care ratios. And I agree, I know that they're completely different settings, and that creates different conversations. But I think about that too, in terms of in a center setting, if there's a mixed age group, that ratio drops to 4 to 1. And we're more than double that in a family childcare home. And, and I think that there's room on both, both in center regulation to look at that and in family childcare. But I just wonder, what I don't have an answer or a solid, but those are just kind of my concerns, is that's a lot of young children for one provider to handle in the event of an emergency, or even 8 crying 12-month-olds. It's a lot.
Absolutely. Those are exactly key. Some of those items that are against having more younger children in capacity. There's that. I think the first one was the emergency evacuation. Maybe that was second, but that's definitely a concern that we've talked about. Noting that we in draft regulation have also increased the emergency plans and drills to be more elaborate and performing drills every month throughout the year instead of only the months that, for example, tornadoes are common. And currently in RAGIT states, you have to do tornado drills only for the 4 months or whatever in the summertime when you're expected to have tornadoes. We aligned it more with centers and said all year round, every month, just do a drill. Be prepared, increase your safety. So there's I agree. We do have some concern about having this many young kiddos with one person at a time. It's a concern that I can see being made. The table 2 at the bottom. So you'll see here soon our center ratios. What we've proposed in centers is still, I think, just a smidgen bit higher than what we've proposed here for homes, because again, they are completely different, apples and oranges. I think for centers, 3-year-olds, we did a 1 to 12 ratio, and then 2.5 to 10. I'm not sure. I have it on the next slide, but what we try to do is, what is that similar ratio for centers that's acceptable for one provider, and then realizing that this isn't a home setting and it is different, kind of tailoring it a little bit more towards a home and figure out what's safe for them, but also noting we want to just be mindful of what's acceptable in one setting versus another throughout the process. So I appreciate that. Any other questions or concerns, safety concerns? Feedback at all, positives, negatives, Now that you see the 10 years of age on the chart itself, are there any concerns about that? Alrighty, so we'll move on to table 2 then, or I'm sorry, 2 provider tables. So table 3 and 4. So what you're going to see on this table, it looks like a lot. So just take a second, look at it. What we did was, we had some really good feedback last month that we actually essentially removed 2 children from care. Because when we tried to incorporate table 4 into this table 3, we didn't really account for the current policy exception that was in place. Essentially what it did was just, when we put this into the table, we removed their ability to have 2 children from 2.5 to 5. And so that's where, just working through this table in general, that's where these 3 asterisks come from next to the 0. It equates down here. We essentially just put that into reg as an asterisk, where if you have your youngest child is 2.5, you can have 12 kids. We definitely didn't mean to take away the number of kids. It was just something that was overlooked. So we've included that back in this table, but we definitely still wanted to include it into one table. We'd be interested to do that with the last 2 tables we just showed you, to somehow incorporate them into one, if possible, but they get to be kind of messy after a while. Kind of like this looks a little messy too. It's just a lot, but we're hoping it's like a one-stop shop for capacity. So this is 2 provider tables. So it looks similar to what we proposed last month. The only changes are, there's 2 changes. Again, we added the asterisks for 0 infants to incorporate table 4 completely. And the last change is added an infant to 2 providers. And so there was some discussion. What really drove us to work on adding another infant to 2 providers was we heard a lot of feedback from our providers themselves, our regulated community. And they said, it is not advantageous for me to add a second provider in a home because I get 1 extra infant. There's just not the payoff to having a second provider. We also realized that in a home setting, there's already a 1 to 3 infant ratio. And so for 2 providers, we toyed around with the idea of a 1 to 5 or 2 to 5 ratio, still lower than the 1 provider infant to ratio category, while allowing for that extra infant. We did keep it at a max capacity of 12 and had some additional children in the like toddler to preschool age and then the school age columns as well. I just kind of want to get your feedback on that. Understanding that the current ratio for 1 provider is already 1 to 3 for infants, how much of a safety issue is it to have a 5th infant? Also noting that, again, the cons, as stated on 2 slides ago, I mean, you have less one-on-one development for your kiddos, possible more safe sleep violations. All of that comes with adding any additional infants to your home than what you currently have. But also then realizing we have all the additional safety training and plans, and it's still lower than the 1 to 3 ratio that we currently have for 1 provider. I would like to get your guys' thoughts on that, adding that final last column with 5 infants. What are your gut-wrenching concerns? And Bernie, if they're the same, like totally speak up and say, you know, this is still not good. You still have a lot of young infants. Or, you know, I actually kind of like this because you have 2 people. It's good or it's not. Just we're totally open to feedback on this as well. I mean, anything, I've said that like 16 times, but.
I mean, since you called me out specifically, I'm actually more comfortable with this because the concern, right, is like the one provider. If
Mhm.
something happens, there is no one else to step in to help. And at least when there's two providers, you know, there's more capacity to handle an emergency or even an unexpected event.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I only called you out because you've given such good feedback through this whole process. I just knew you'd give some good feedback here too. And we have Lynette said that she likes the table. So Natalie, good question. We did toy with the idea of 6 infants. We didn't feel super great about it because of all of those cons that we stated 2 slides ago. Adding 2 more infants to the home, you really, I mean, trying to get, if you have, it's just, there's some safety concerns with it. I mean, I think we run into the same problem as adding a 4th infant at that point to one provider, with the lack of one-on-one care, and like for development for the kiddo. Having 6 cribs in the house is kind of, it's a lot to try and do, all of the extra equipment that you would need to purchase, increase safety concerns. So we just thought that 6 would be too much of a safety concern or a jump to adding to the table. Melissa, do you have any other feedback on that, or yeah?
No, Allison, I think you articulated the program's concern, because that's really what it boils down to, is making sure that we are meeting marketplace adjustments, but also realizing that a home environment is very different than when we look at our childcare centers, which are in self-contained units. A home, you have children, you will snap in other rooms, you utilize lots of space. 6 infants, and then really back to Bernie's point, you could have then in your next category, you can have 4 that are all 12 months, theoretically. It just was not where the department wanted, or the program felt like it was in the best interest of children to compromise safety, knowing that, again, the environment is very different, and in trying to get children out, and that good, what we're looking for, with that good child development, those moments of infants needing to be rocked, infants needing to be talked to, diaper changing. It just really did not make sense to continue to put children out at risk. Yes, Natalie, we are still within the threshold of the fire marshal having 12, or we're staying within 12. 12, facilities continue to be classified as residential facilities when they have 12 unrelated children to them in their home. So we're still within the normal capacity of what state fire marshal considers for residential home facilities.
Mm-hmm. And we do plan on having more discussions with the fire marshal to talk about different options and changes that are possible. But that those decisions have yet to be made.
And Natalie, to answer your question, we are on the threshold of being over best practice. Best practice is 1 infant or 2 infants to every provider. I would encourage you to look at Caring for Children and their capacity tables. That provides the blueprint for best practice across the nation. And so we're trying to find a comfortable medium that balances good practice. Remember, regulations are foundational to best practice. And Natalie, fire marshal, fire code is not within KDHE's purview. We look at our statewide partners to make their decisions on what is best and safe occupancy for their program types that they license. So we will continue to defer to the state fire marshal to make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry,
so-
I figure maybe I should just, instead of typing in the chat, I apologize. I guess the question is just making sure that for the state fire marshal, similar to building codes, similar to KDHE regulations, things can go through a review process and best practices. And so my question is, if the fire marshal with a residential setting, as long as you have enough per square foot per child and you still meet the correct ratios of supervision and safety, is it possible to increase that number from 12? Because if you're still an in-home provider, having a second person there with you and your maximum amount is still 12 children, it could be still a struggle to be able to afford that. So it's great that we expanded capacity in theory, but how many people can actually afford to do this? And so, of course, fire marshal, building code, all of those things are, trust me, needed and required. But I'm just curious with that 12 number, if the fire marshal is willing to look at best practices across the United States, and if that 12 could be 14 or whatever. So that was my main question, motivation of that.
I appreciate it, Natalie. Yeah, like I said, we'll still have discussions with the fire marshal. That may not be a change that will be made during this regulation review, but we do have to do a regulation review of all regulations every 5 years. And so there's a number of things that we've tabled for a good 5-year plan. That would probably have to be something that would have to be a 5-year plan item. Just in the interest of time for this set of regulations to go through the promulgation process. We would definitely have to, we're at the mercy of the fire marshal with that specific thing, and we'd have to let them make that decision. And I don't think that's going to happen in the next couple of months. But that is something that we are actively working to have conversations with the fire marshal about, things like that and other items that the fire marshal like mandates for us. So.
And also local jurisdiction trumps all state fire marshals. So local jurisdiction may still require more stringent occupancy codes, which we see across the state anyway. So that really, again, is all deferred to the local, even if we made a change. So just keeping that all in mind. And Allison, I see you're at your last slides are close to the end, so I will stop chatting.
Yeah, so, thanks. So this is the second to last slide. It's going to be on here real quick. Again, this is what we proposed last month, just for reference. The next slide is our last content slide. So if you guys have to hop off at noon, I totally understand. We will be wrapping up here in the next few minutes, probably just after noon. So one more content slide after this. So again, this is what we proposed last month. The next table on the next slide looks a little bit much. It's because I added what is currently on the table and like striked it out so you can see a little bit better. So this is where we've currently landed. I know, again, it looks a lot. It's a lot. The children at least 3 but under school age in the kindergarten enrollee columns, those were already excluded. I added them in here just so you can see what's been removed, even from the one we proposed last month, just for easier digestion and to look. The biggest change that we made from last month is we did bring back the 2 to 3 year. I believe it was the 2 to 3 year. Yeah. So we only had 2.5 to under school age in the previous table. We did bring back 2 to 3 years and kept it at the same ratio. That was at the request of some feedback that we had. Some centers do just like that little niche of 2 to 3 year olds. And we didn't want to exclude them at all. So we did just add it in there. It wasn't harmful to add it. And it was trying to be inclusive of the 2.5 but under school age. The only other change that we've made really is the infant column. So compared to last month. So real quick, the infant column, what we proposed last month was a 1 to 4 max 12. We got a lot of feedback that 12 was outrageous, too much, not good, no bueno. We heard you, and we got rid of 12. The issue that we see with where we want to go, we're at a 1 to 3 max 9 right now. If we move to NACE standard and say a 1-to-4 ratio, and we doubled it, the ratio, obviously, because you have to do multiplications of your staff child ratio, it would have to be max 8 if we didn't do 12. Now, if we say you can have 4 infants to 1 staff member, and a max of 8, we would then have you lose a child in capacity going from 9 to 8. But we definitely wanted to give the programs the flexibility to pick as needed. So that's exactly what we've done here. So for rooms, we've left it to where you can choose 1 to 3 max 9 or 1 to 4 max 8. Not both at the same time, but one or the other. We've discussed whether or not that's going to be flexible from day to day, depending on your staffing from that day, if someone's sick, or if it's going to be on your license that you pick one or the other room. We're still discussing that. But essentially what this does is, I mean, some providers see the benefit of having a 1 to 4. You lose an infant, but you don't have to pay for a whole nother staff member. And so that can be economically advantageous of the center to lose an infant, but also not have to pay for a full staff. Additionally, if you, and this is kind of hard to do the math in your head, but if you added one more staff member, you could have a whole nother room and have 16 children. If you had the space and equipment to do another infant room, then based on what you currently have, if you had 3 staff members right now with 9 infants. The staff member that you could also remove from the ratio, if you chose 1 to 4 max 8, you could take that 1 staff member. And again, if you had the room in a different area, you can throw that 1 staff member into that other room. And again, have 4 additional infants in the other room. So there's a lot of different ideas. We didn't want to force facilities to choose one or the other. We wanted to give them that flexibility to pick one or the other based on the needs of their program, what they decide, if they need 9 children, if they need 8 children, what their staffing looks like, whether or not, again, that it could be flipped from day to day, depending on if someone calls in sick that day. Then you only have to call one parent and say, I can't take your child today, but everyone else can stay, that kind of thing. So that was the only additional change that we made in the table contents themselves. I also want to note one last thing. Down in the school age key defined terms, we have toyed with the idea of mirroring the definition of school age to that of school age program regulations, which they're in the school age program definitions define a school age child as someone who is kindergarten through, I think it's like 6th grade. But we would essentially combine the two to say pretty much kindergarten through 16 is a school age child. So that would incorporate your kindergarten enrollee column here, or your row here. Again, this is center regs, so it is a little different, but we did think about including kindergarten age into the definition of a school age child.
Can I note really quick too, Allison, that our definitions have not changed since the 80s. So we're looking at modernizing our definitions, making it more fluid for facilities, and really moving away from having our definitions for school agers align with as we define school agers within school age programs, so that if you're moving from program type, it helps with programs who have multiple staff working. You're trying to think, where can I put this child? Where do they transition to if they are in my center and now we have a school age program? And it also helps our surveyors understand and provide really good if the definitions are somewhat aligned for definitely our school age children. So just a reminder that we've not touched this capacity chart since the 80s.
Absolutely. And I like how we already answered Bernie's questions without it. I didn't even read it before I started talking about the definition of a school age child. So I believe it's eligible or attending in the definition. I have it open right here, actually. school age child or means an individual who is of kindergarten age through the academic year in which they're in the 6th grade. But again, like I said, we would just do through 16.
Right. I guess I mean, to clarify my question, the way that this chart is written, if it's based on kindergarten eligibility, if I don't have a school age classroom and I have a parent whose child turns 5 in August that chooses not to send their child to kindergarten until the next year, this would not allow me to care for them.
It's just kindergarten age.
That's what, I guess that's what I'm saying. If they don't
Okay.
enroll them in kindergarten, we would keep them in like our preschool room for an extra year until they start kindergarten.
And that's still our intent, Bernie. 'cause
Okay.
we recognize
I just wanted
that.
to make sure we
Sorry.
didn't like
No,
leave
no,
those kids without care.
no. And in fact, we'd love to really do that. And then we really want to have a way that honors our preschool programs whose parents don't send their kids to kindergarten and keep them in their preschool, because right now we're limited by the definition. So no, our goal is not to change what we already have in place, because we already do have that in place, where in the school age, in that preschool unit, it's to school age. So the way we have that definition, it's cleaning up that very antiquated kindergarten enrollee, because we have very few facilities that have those standalone kindergarten enrollees, because it's just a school ager at that point. And we have so many or statements that we're really trying to figure out a way that is advantageous to the facility and to the program, and not have those or statements, especially for that weird particular age group. But no, Bernie, our intent is never, when we finish definitions, to kick out kids that parents do not choose to keep them, because one thing that COVID has taught us, and before that, is they're keeping those kids longer in the preschool setting and doing 2 years of, our traditional preschool. So we want to make sure that we know we don't cause a system panic, and that you guys start thinking you need to kick kids out, because we don't do it now. And if we don't do it now, we're definitely not going to do it. But we don't want facilities also to be running for and applying for needless exceptions, that we could figure out a way that so good food for thought, Bernie, that when we do finalize our definitions, that we make sure we keep all of that, especially those kids that might be transitioning and turning 6 that summer before. You shouldn't just kick them out of that preschool room, because that's the only room they know. So we have to find a way that honors all of those scenarios without being punitive, because I also don't want a surveyor to go on site and say, oh, Bernie, you have a child that should be in kindergarten, 6 years of age, they need to go. So we need to find a nice balance.
Mhm. Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
you.
That was definitely more of a program specific question. Answering one last question, Amanda, before we wrap up. Amanda put in the chat, is there any value in describing school age versus 5-year-old? We actually, I think I originally wanted to use age ranges. So I think I put like infants is 0 to 12, and then toddlers is 12 to 30 months. But really there's that additional piece that qualifies an infant and toddler, such as walking. Infants are up to 12 months or older if they're not walking. And then toddler is at least 12 months and walking up to 30 months. And then school age right now is if they turn 6 on or before September 1st or whatever of the academic school year. So it was a very specific date that allowed them to be enrolled in school, that definition came about. So now it would obviously change kindergarten age through 16, but we did toy with the idea of using just numbers on the table, but because of the additional descriptors for each classification of the ages of children, we thought it would be more appropriate to keep it at the title of the age group.
That makes some sense. The piece that I was kind of sticking on is that as we have more schools who are expanding their preschool programming, we spend a lot of time with schools helping them understand for our purposes, a 3-year-old preschooler turns 3 years old on or before August 31st, a 4-year-old preschooler is 4 on or before August 31st, and a kindergarten age student is 5 years old on or before August 31st. And so I can imagine somebody looking at this and seeing school age and saying, okay, is that kindergarten age? Is that preschool age? So.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And that would be written into definition of kindergarten age on before probably this day or something similar to that. Yeah, I guess the current definition is just of kindergarten age. So we probably would add a day of their birthday by a certain day in the definition itself. I appreciate that.
We definitely do need to talk more one-on-one with you, Amanda, to make
Oh,
sure
yeah.
what we're doing within our school districts. And
Mhm.
one of the pieces just off is just understanding our memorandum of agreement and making sure that we're flexible for both KSDE and KDHE and meeting the community's needs rather than overburdening in some way. So I appreciate you coming off screen to poke us a little bit more.
Oh, yeah, totally. Okay, so again, last slide, quick wrap up. We do have as Derek mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we do have a provider engagement session this Saturday, 9 to noon. It's the same structure. 9 to 10 is homes, 10 to 11 is centers and preschools, and 11 to 12 is school age and drop-in. We haven't touched drop-in regs, so it's really just going to be school age from 11 to 12. It's going to be recorded and posted on the website. And then we are also asking our surveyors for feedback. Pretty much the same presentation we gave you today. Our own surveyors are going to get on Monday the 24th, so they can give their feedback as well. So we will gather all this feedback together, and if we feel the need to, if things drastically change or we're kind of needing to figure out where to go, we'll definitely reach out again. And again, here's the QR code for that same survey that has each of the 59 regulations spelled out for specific input. I appreciate those who have already submitted input for regulations. We do look at those all the time and compile them and discuss the changes. So all right, that's the end of the presentation. Thank you guys so much for sticking on a few minutes after noon. We had a lot of really good information today, lots of really great input. I appreciate everyone and their input. So if you guys have any questions, send me an email, send us an email, and we will reach out to you guys if we have any further need for input as we work through the final edits of these regulations. Perfect.